I'm labelled a violent thug at the age of 70. I still carry 2 criminal records that impact on me today. And I'm not the only one. There's thousands of us like that.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
So this is a conversation that's been a little while in the making. Last year we got an email from a John Dunn in the UK, who was part of the big coal miner strike over there in the 80s, sending solidarity to the folks down in Brookwood. And I thought, we've got to get him on the show sometime for sure. And we finally done it. So, John, many thanks for taking the time to talk to us today, all the way from across the pond.
It's great. And can I congratulate you on a great show? It's inspiring to hear the news of unionization over there, because we get none of this news. The Alabama strikers have had no coverage whatsoever, and it was searching for them that I came across yourselves, and I've tuned in, usually on YouTube later because of the time difference, and I really enjoy the show. Well done.
Well, I appreciate it, and that really means a lot coming from there are few, or there is I don't ever get any praise that makes me feel better than when it comes from working folks, and particularly people that have been active in their unions. And Adam, I don't know if I haven't told you this yet, but Adam Obernour from the RWDSU, he was at the he was at the APWU convention last week and said somebody recognized his hat, our logo cap, and said, "Oh, hey, I like those guys."
Well,
that's pretty cool.
John, yeah, it really means a lot, especially coming from you and hearing it from folks who are from far away, but ultimately our struggles are connected, and I think that's
absolutely
that's what I love. So yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for your praise.
Yeah. So let's start with some personal history for you. Everybody knows that mining is a really hard job. So what got you into the industry?
It's a bit of a long story, but shall we say I was a child of the 60s, and I went to what we call a grammar school, which is a selective school. You have to wear uniforms, caps, badges. Some of the teachers wore gowns. I got caned for not having a badge on my blazer at one time. And being the 60s, I was reading about Che Guevara, who'd just been killed in Bolivia, reading things, getting interested, inspired by the general strike in France. And I was a bit of a rebel. I grew my hair. I started going to school in jeans, and so what they said was they took me off the register because being a grammar school, they didn't want to look bad by expelling people, which meant I had to find a job. So I walked out of school and got a job on a building site as a labourer. I'll be honest, I found that as a 17-year-old lad a bit of a struggle, chopping the ends of my fingers off with bricks and heavy things. So I moved around, had a few jobs, and then in the end I got a job in an engineering firm. And I was telling my dad, I come from a long family of miners. My father, my grandfather, their ancestors were all in mining. And I told him what this job involved. It was called a hot press. You're working in hot temperatures, working with hot oil. And my dad just said, "You're not doing that. I know somebody at Glatwell Pit." And he rang up and got me a job. And that's how I started in 1970 at the age of 18.
So what did your day as a miner look like? Like what job did you have in the mines, or did you have several different jobs in the mines?
Well, when I started, because I got educational qualifications. They thought I was a ripe for a candidate to be streamlined into management, but I soon persuaded them otherwise of that. I didn't get trained to work on coalface because I'm a severe asthmatic. So I did a number of jobs underground, and in 1972 we had our first national miners' strike for a living wage. I spent my 20th birthday actually on the picket line in the snow, and that sort of schooled me. And I got very active in the trade union, served as a time as a branch official at that pit, and then in 1976 they announced its closure, and I led the fight to try and keep it open, which unfortunately we lost. And with that came my first experience of what happens to militant trade unions at the time. No other pit wanted to accept me because of that trade union record. So in the end, I ended up at my last pit called Markham, and they put me in the safety department doing dust monitoring and dust control, thinking that that would keep me out of harm's way. It wasn't by any means the best paid job in the pit, but what it did allow me was to go to every area of the pit. So I got quite well known as a union activist. It was by no means a militant pit, but I managed to become again a branch official from time to time in that NUM branch. And one of the reasons about the safety department, I should say that our pits, because of the strength of the NUM, were the safest, most advanced pits in the world. And so we all had a specialist safety department that dealt with dust, ventilation, general safety, etc., etc.
Now, just for the audience,
sorry?
Just for the audience, the NUM is the National Union of Miners. That was a miners'
sorry,
union.
I slip into these local abbreviations. Sorry, you might need translation with some of the terms I use.
No worries at all. So you mentioned that you're talking about the NUM and y'all had really safe mines. Is it correct that the mines in the UK were nationalised?
Yes, they were nationalised in 1948 under the Labour government. Yes. Unfortunately, we weren't given workers' control. It was very much the same management ethos as had been under private mine owners. But what it did result was a strong national union. Before that, we were always a federated union, but before that, you literally had local sections dealing with their own problems.
Right. So the union, nationalization was a kind of brought all those federated locals together into the NUM, and I'm interested about some of the day-to-day, before the big strike and ultimately the closures of all or most of the mines in the UK. I'm interested in what the day-to-day was like, because we're really familiar as union members and as union activists and branch officials, like you would say. We've both been elected officers of our unions. We're pretty familiar with private and public sector workings and how we bargain contracts and how we deal with grievances and the different approaches and some of the debates. But I'm very, very unfamiliar with the terrain and over in the UK. So I'm interested in some of that day-to-day stuff, not from a job perspective, but more in the vein of how did you as miners, as union miners, interface with the company, like workplace issues? How did you bargain contracts, stuff like that?
Well, all negotiations were done at national level. We had national agreements. We had what was known as the when mechanisation was being bought in wholesale, we had the national power loading agreement that determined wages nationally, especially for face workers, that made sure that people in less productive pits got the same wage, because production can depend on a number of things: conditions, height of the coal face, etc., etc. So every miner in every pit was on the same grade for the job that they did.
And so
And locally, we negotiate. You'd have disputes from time to time. We had full-time branch secretaries who would do negotiations on behalf of management, because from time to time, local disputes would spring up, and they tended to get resolved very quickly. Again, because of the strength of our union. It was called a closed shop, which meant that you had to join the union when you signed on for employment in the mines.
So what about when local management officials would violate the contract? Or maybe that didn't even happen. But here in the States, we'll get a lot of times, even where you've got a union contract. We just talked about a story earlier in the show. NBC News, their workers are unionized, and management unilaterally issued salary reductions. And that was 2 years ago, and just recently they won back pay in the amount of $200,000. And so that kind of speaks to maybe some of the ineffectiveness of the legal system, and maybe even perhaps of the union. But 2 years later, NBC is having to write a check for $200,000 because the bosses and the executives violated the contract. What happened when bosses violated the contract?
Well, they couldn't because of the national agreements, but what they sometimes do would be pushing things too hard, insisting perhaps that working conditions were a little bit different. So we'd either go on strike for a day or until it was resolved, or we would do what we did, a sit-in in what we called the pit bottom, and not leave to go to the workings. So things got resolved. But if you had a problem, you just went to your union official, who talked to management and sort it out. It was incredible.
Yeah, it sounds pretty incredible. Did your contracts have no strike clauses, or could you strike?
No. The union up until 1971, 72 was a very moderate union. We accepted, my dad used to refer to them as a packet of fag risers, where you got a few, very little increase, and you very much had collaboration between the union officials at national level and the employer. So that all changed with a new mood of militancy and the left-wing rank and file members getting organised, and it culminated in the election of Arthur Scargill as an agent for the Yorkshire region, who then later went on to become not just our leader, but the best trade union leader this country's ever seen.
So moving then into the strike, what is the time frame? I know that it happened in the 80s, but what is the time frame that we're talking about more specifically, and what triggered it? What were some of the issues at hand?
Well, I'll just go back a little bit.
Okay.
In 1974, we actually went on strike for more wages. That was our second ever national. We actually bought down a government. We actually bought down a Conservative government who never forgave us for that. And a few years later, they commissioned what they called, it was top secret, the Wrigley Report.
So
a cabinet minister.
I'm sorry, John. Just for a moment, could you tell our listeners what it means to bring down a government in the UK?
Well, we had a Conservative government, and we went on a 6-week strike in which time we picketed power stations, and we were having power outages. The government was having to ration electricity. So, and people were being put on a 3-day week because most energy was supplied by coal. So eventually the Prime Minister, Edward Heath at the time, decided, thinking he could win handsomely, to call an election under the slogan of "Who runs the country?" And he lost. So we proved that the unions ran the country. Unfortunately, the Labour Party that represented it is a bit more like, until Jeremy Corbyn came along, which is a different story, a bit might look like your modern day Democrats, who are more corporate and establishment inclined. So yeah, we brought down the government, and as I say, they never forgave us and commissioned a report by Nicholas Wrigley, a cabinet minister, deliberately to break, in particular, our union. And so they were waiting for us, and we, in 1981, they announced, they threatened a series of pit closures, and a lot of unofficial strikes backed off, so they weren't quite ready. So in 1984, they actually provoked a strike. Before that, just before that, we'd had a bonus scheme imposed on us, an area bonus scheme that meant that the more coal you produced, the higher your wages were. We'd campaigned against it, we'd defeated it in a ballot, but certain areas, certain right-wing controlled areas broke away, and we ended up with that, which was literally put us on a suicide mission, because obviously people chased the bonus. We increased coal stocks and enabled the government to build up reserves for a strike. And the government appointed a fella from over your way, Ian McGregor, who had a history of taking on trade unions. I believe he'd done it in companies in the US, and he later did it in Britain in the steelworks. He smashed the union and destroyed that industry, and he was set on by Margaret Thatcher's government to take us on. So they were ready, and they provoked this strike by announcing, against all national agreements, we actually had agreement about pit closures that went through a negotiation procedure. You looked at whether working conditions made it impossible to mine, whether coal was exhausted, etc., etc. They broke that agreement and announced 20 pit closures, with 5 to shut immediately, within a week. And so miners in a Yorkshire pit called Corton Wood, which was the first to close, immediately walked out. This was in March 1984. Picketed other pits in Yorkshire, asking in true, workers' tradition for solidarity. And one by one, pits came out throughout Yorkshire, and then they spread the strike into other areas. And a few days later, we in Derbyshire were picketed out. And the strike at first was relatively solid. And so we had an area, Nottinghamshire, that was traditionally more moderate, that had a section that didn't want to strike. So eventually they broke the strike and later formed a breakaway union, the Union of Democratic Miners. So yeah, the battleground was set. I don't know if that's a little bit too scattered for you to take in.
No, not at all. So the main issue was over the closures of the pits.
Yeah. Arthur Scargill was then our national president, warned that it wasn't 20 pits, it was going to be 70, and then eventually they would destroy the entire industry, which we now have done. There's not a working pit left in Britain. And as I say, that strike spread, and we were picketed out, and immediately the media onslaught began. You know, we'd not had a ballot, we'd acted in true solidarity. When pickets came to our pit, we walked to our local miners' welfare, which was our social club, and we had a show of hands to support the strike, the most democratic way you can vote, and solidly we walked out on strike. And so I was on strike for a few days, less than one whole year.
And so the was there ever, like, did it spread kind of from local to local, or the whole time, and eventually get national, or was there kind of a certain tipping point when Scargill, the leader of the union, issued a nationwide proclamation for a strike, or did it go one by one?
No, he never issued anything. Arthur, the NUM was a very democratic union, and Arthur, as president, didn't even actually have a vote on the national executive. He just had the casting vote in times of a tie. But what happened is, you rightly say, it spread from, we didn't call them locals, we called them branches, spread from branch to branch to branch, and eventually it was a national strike. And then later in a few weeks into the strike, there was a national conference of delegates from every mine, every area executive, that made the strike official. So yes, it became an official national strike.
And so I'm interested in it. You know, you mentioned the media onslaught. I'm interested in the response to the strike from the public and the media and the government, and particularly in light of the UK media's response to the RMT strike, which I want to get your take on a little bit later, because it's fascinating to me. It seems like, but what was the response to the strike as all of this is happening from everybody?
Well, we got tremendous rank and file support. Unfortunately, we were let down by the Trade Union Congress, which is the national body that supposedly coordinates trade unions. We were let down by the official leadership of the then Labour Party, but at rank and file, we had tremendous support. We had solidarity strikes. The dockers came out because they'd been instructed to unload coal at docks, and then eventually they were bought off. The government wanted to make sure we were isolated, but fantastic support. When you imagine keeping a national strike of 160,000 people going for a year, just the sheer logistics of making sure people didn't starve, of showing solidarity, tremendous rank and file support, and some major trade unions. What happened during that strike is the government sequestrated our union funds. We tried to hide them, but unbeknown to us at the time, they had a secret service spy high up working for the union, and so they quickly traced that money. As I say, they were very organised and froze all our assets. So the union, if they wanted to, they couldn't even order paper clips without permission from the government. So they were trying to starve us back literally from day one. We were denied social security benefits for strikers. We depended on little bits of strike pay that we raised and donations from all over the country. The media onslaught, never seen anything like it. They demonised Scargill. There was a photograph of him addressing a rally, in Nottinghamshire in the strike, where he got a real ovation as he came on, and he lifted his arms up like that to tell the crowd to sit down. They photoshopped one arm out to show him giving a Nazi salute.
Wow.
With the headline "Mein Führer,"
Oh my
M-I-N-E. And we had strong print unions in those days. They refused to print it after the first edition went out, and eventually Rupert Murdoch took his revenge on them a few years later. But that's the sort of solidarity we had. But Scargill was absolutely demonised. For him to show the strength of character to stand up to it, I don't know how he did it. It was, he had people camped in, press reporters camped in his garden, surrounding his house, harassing his daughter, harassing his wife, everything, and that continued even after the strike.
You mentioned
it still is demonised to this day.
Right.
And they try to portray it. They always say that Scargill called the strike. No, all he did was endorse the strike that was already taking place. And they like to make it out as a battle between Arthur Scargill and Margaret Thatcher, and make it all about the individuals rather than the cause that we were fighting. We only wanted a job. We weren't after wages. We weren't after changing conditions. We wanted to keep our jobs. And with our jobs, we lived in isolated communities in the main that depended upon that mine,
Right.
For its livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, if you destroy a mine, you destroy a community. And that came true with a vengeance. So we were fighting for a lot more, and it eventually became a community campaign. Our wives and partners, sisters, daughters, joined us on the picket line, formed a group called Women Against Pit Closures, and when we were taken off the picket line for one thing or another, they replaced us. Tremendous community support. I've never, I get emotional just talking about it. It showed what could be.
Right.
We had local, what we now call food banks. We had communal kitchens where we're fed a good meal every day. We had food parcels every week. It showed what society actually could be like.
Yes, and it really seems for some even more. It seems like such a common thread in miners' strikes, specifically for some reason. I don't hear as much of this from other strikes, but you're talking about we've got what they're calling a strike pantry in Brookwood for the folks, the miners who are on strike in Alabama, that, like you said, it allows them to take groceries for free. The union purchases groceries with funds from the union and with donations from the community, from local grocery stores at wholesale, discounted prices, and then gives it to the members for free from their pantry. They have school supply drives. They've now had 2. They've had to send their kids back to school after the summer twice now, and they've had new clothes, new backpacks, new school supplies, all for free for the union members. And the union in the last 500 days has spent more than $20 million supporting these folks, giving them strike benefits, and there has been more than $2 million raised from the community and donations and stuff. So that looks really familiar to me as I'm going down. I've been to the strike pantry several times. I've been with them at their rallies and seen how their community and how their wives are supporting the strikers. And I've seen the documentaries from like Harlan County, USA. That looks like that's something that happened there
Yes,
too.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you're saying that it happened over in the UK, and that's really, really interesting, the similarities there.
Well, I think that comes from the communities, living in close-knit communities. You know, you work together in the main, you socialise together. Probably most of your neighbours work alongside you, and also underground. You're looking out for each other's back. You're all aware that it's a communal effort underground, and that's what I think helps breed the solidarity. And you're literally fighting nature every day. So it's an arduous job. Even the lightest jobs down a mine are totally different to anything you'd experience anyway. So I think that comes out of that, and also the history of solidarity, having to fight back against rapacious owners, having to defend each other at times of hardship, having to stand in solidarity. You know, when miners used to be locked out, the 26th strike, we had lockouts where the pits were just closed and miners couldn't work. Miners were evicted from the homes and lived in tents and communal shacks and things like that. So all that's part of a rich history of mining.
I wanted to, while we're still talking about the strike, and I wanted to go back to something else that you said in another talk that you gave about the media's attack on y'all, and you gave it to a summer school in London, and I listened to this in preparation for in preparation for the interview, and you told a story about how the media over in the UK reversed footage trying to make, and this is another, again, commonality in miner strikes, where the media and the bosses try to make it seem like miners are these violent thugs, right? And we've seen that down here, and we saw it in Harlan County during those strikes, and that's something that y'all saw over there, where there was footage of miners, what in actuality defending themselves against attacks from people from cops on horseback, but they reversed it. They showed and they made it seem like the cops were the ones defending themselves, but actually chronologically what happened is the cops attacked and then the miners defended.
Yeah, that happened at the most violent. Well, it was a police riot at a coking plant, Orgreave in South Yorkshire, and we had an agreement with the steel workers that we would supply limited amounts of coking of coke to keep the furnaces hot. So that was an agreement that we never broke. And then all of a sudden, the government ripped that up and decided to start shipping large amounts of coal by lorry. And I should say that the rail workers never moved a lump of coal for that whole year. They showed tremendous solidarity, being sent home from work because they refused to work, etc., etc. We didn't even have to picket them. They'd ring up and say, can you put a sign up at such and such a junction, and we'll not cross it. And that was the solidarity that they showed. So they moved this, coke by lorry, by mass lorry movement. And it's important to stress that since we have something called the 30-year rule over here, which after 30 years, cabinet papers that are mainly secret can be released. And our researchers have found that from early on in the strike, Margaret Thatcher micromanaged it, and the scribblings in the margins in her own handwriting, where she's actually calculating the number of lorries needed to keep a steelworks open. She gave orders early on in the police to start getting physical with us, which they relished. This scene behind is a scene from Orgreave. It's a mounted police charge through a little village, through Orgreave village. She instructed the courts to convict us quicker, and I was an early casualty of all that. But at Orgreave, June the 18th, 1984, and I have to say, there's so many details that have to explain the background of the strike. We had police roadblocks everywhere. If you looked like you were a minor, your car was stopped. We couldn't get onto motorways. We couldn't get out of our towns and villages at times. There was a ring of steel put around mining areas. And if you were stopped, you were threatened with arrest if you refused to turn around and go back. We had mass police on picket lines, hundreds and hundreds. They created, just for this dispute, a national police force.
Wow.
If you don't mind, before I go on to Orgreave, I'll just explain what happened to me, because it's indicative of the violence that they were meting out, the frame-ups that we got. If that's okay, I'll just mention that as briefly as I can.
Yeah,
Is
go
that
ahead.
okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, absolutely.
Early in the strike, about a month after I'd been on strike, I was picketing at a Nottinghamshire colliery called Cresswell. We had a very peaceful picket, and I was walking back when I saw a lad about to be arrested. So I just grabbed him and shoved him back into the picket line. And then I felt my head explode. I didn't know what was happening. I thought I had to fight to stay on my feet. And when I turned round, there's a policeman absolutely drenched in blood. His face was dripping with it, and that was my blood. He smashed the back of my head in with his truncheon, with his cough. And I was dragged away and never arrested, thrown into a police wagon, and I was dripping blood everywhere. And I made a complaint, and the policeman in charge of the van I was in wanted to take me in. We had ambulance and medical centres at every pit. Wanted to take me into the pit to be looked at, and I said, I'm not going in there. These people have just crossed our picket line. I'm not being touched by a scab. And his words were, I hope you don't mind me swearing. His actual words were, well, you can fucking bleed to death then. And it was only the intervention of my late brother that got me taken urgently to hospital. When I got there, I was surrounded by police, and they persuaded the surgeon to stitch me up without anaesthetic.
Oh my God.
Wow.
And I tell you, that hurts. I was thrown into a cell and appeared in court next day to find I'd been charged with threatening behaviour. The important thing is it was the back of my head that got smashed in, not the front, not my shoulders, the back of my head. So literally I threatened a policeman with the back of my head. And that's what happened to me. And we found out that was just 2 days after Thatcher instructed the police to get tough. And that, I don't know if you can see it, that's the stickers I was wearing, still covered in my blood. I had to burn my clothes. And that was dished out throughout the strike. Orgreave, that I'll go on to in 1 minute, was the pinnacle of that. But we had 11,000 pickets arrested. 11,000. That's bigger than the population of most of our villages. 7,000 of us were injured, and that's injuries that needed treatment, either hospitalisation or doctors. 2,000 of us were sacked, and 2 were actually murdered on the picket line. So that's the national statistics. And as I say, we couldn't move because of this ring of steel. that that surround us. But on June the 18th, all of a sudden, we were being escorted into Orgreave. The police actually created a parking area for pickets to park. Now that raised alarm bells straight away. And what did miners see when they got there? No less than 6,000 police.
Wow.
Waited. Just by accident. Wasn't supposed to, they were just out for a stroll. It was a hot sunny day, I suppose. And with them they had police dogs and mounted cavalry lying in wait to surround us. It was a very peaceful picket. What we would do on every picket line is when scab lorries or scab miners would come in, there'd be a bit of a surge. The police would hold you back or batter you back, and then it was over. People were dispersing. You can see on this photo lads without shirts, lads in shorts, lads in t-shirts, simple trainers. And these police were armed with long shields, long batons, snarling dogs, and all of a sudden there was a cavalry charge. And willy-nilly, indiscriminately, miners, the picket had finished. People were walking back to the buses and the cars. These police attacked, and attacked with a vengeance, lashing out at anybody, men, women, bystanders, anything. And here we come to where the BBC, our state broadcaster, supposedly impartial, put out on its main news bulletin at 6 o'clock that the police had defended themselves against rioting miners. As I say, the police were dressed in riot gear. You can see what our brothers were wearing, and it was a rout. 95 were arrested. Most of them were charged with riot, which carried a potential life imprisonment, potentially going to jail for life for simply wanting to defend your job. And the BBC put up this and said, miners built barricades from which to attack the police. That's true. But you don't build barricades to attack, you build barricades to defend.
Right.
And so they cleverly reversed the footage to show young lads fighting back and the police responding. 10 years later, they've never apologized. They said it was a simple mistake. A simple mistake that tarnished us nationally as violent rioting thugs and helped undermine any solidarity we might get. And every day it was about miners' violence, never mind about these police attacks. And that's what happened almost every day. We had cavalry charges in tiny mining villages, indiscriminate kicking in of doors and people being dragged out and arrested. And that's what we faced for most of that year. And as I say, Orgreave is the pinnacle. I'm now involved in a campaign, a marvellous campaign, called the Orgreave Truth and Justice Campaign. We campaigned for a public inquiry into that one day and what happened and what orders the police were given. Because you don't get 6,000 police waiting in a field for nothing. And what we hope to do is expose what happened at Orgreave, because as I say, that was the most visible, most reported thing, as a way of shining a light on everything that happened during that year. and again, was well orchestrated.
Mm-hmm.
We've had access to some of the police reports of that day, but the orders have been mysteriously lost. And as I say, 95 of our comrades were facing life imprisonment. Some of them were put in jail on remand, put in jail, not in open prisons, but in jail, in maximum security jails, with rapists, with murderers, etc., etc. Those that were arrested were denied any medical treatment. Some had broken arms, some had serious concussion, many were bleeding, and the fellow arrestees had to bandage them up with t-shirts, etc., etc. That's what happened that one fateful day, but that was happening all the way through.
Wow. And so, you mentioned that not one pit is operating today in the UK. What was the ultimate resolution of the strike? Were all the mines closed immediately, or was it was it more gradual than that?
It was a salami tactic. What happened was, towards the end of the strike, there was a massive drive to get people to scab. And, a lot of people had suffered. They'd literally been starved for a whole year. We started having this move back to work. And I think it could have been contained. But certain areas that had no record of scabbing, their leaderships panicked, and a special delegate conference was called, and it was narrowly accepted that the strike would be called off without an agreement, and that we would march back to work with dignity, which is what we did. So literally the strike collapsed because of this onslaught and hunger. People, a union comrade of mine said early on in the strike, he was talking to open minds amongst his fellow miners who were supporting the strike. At the end of the strike, he was talking to empty bellies, and that's what carried the day. So I think it was a tragedy to call it off. And evidence now shows that on a number of occasions we were in days of winning, that the coal stocks had diminished so rapidly. The solidarity action that wasn't moving coal was really starting to bite. And I think if we could have kept it just for 2 or 3, perhaps a month longer, we could have won. And the whole course of British history, the whole course of the decimation of our industry and manufacturing industry throughout Britain could have been halted, and the onslaught of neoliberalism that we've got now could have been stopped. But, that's speculation. And slowly but surely, every pit was closed. They'd actually rigged the market. We used to supply cheap coal. Our energy was all nationalised. The country owned electricity generation, electricity distribution. It owned oil. It owned British Petroleum. It owned gas, British gas. And slowly, although our market was rigged, so it made it cheaper for them to buy imported coal, and slowly but surely, pits were deemed that had never been uneconomic before, were deemed uneconomic and closed one by one. And the last, what we call a deep mine in Britain, closed in 2015. I was there on behalf of our Orgreave campaign. It was an awful day because we knew that was the end. And now our communities are devastated. You know, they've not just lost the mine, they've lost their livelihood, they've lost a lot of their services, and the battle has been to keep those communities together.
Right.
And I'm proud to say a lot of the mining communities, you know, still stand tall and are proud of what we do. Every year on the second Saturday in July, we have what's known as the Durham Miners Gala. It's not just about miners, it attracts the whole of the trade union movement. And this year, there were 250,000 people on that march and participating in the gala. So, you know, the memories linger on, the spirit lingers on. And I always say, Thatcher's dead, but we're still here.
Hell yeah.
Hell
I
yeah.
gotta say that was just very inspiring. The courage, the bravery, the sacrifices that so many of y'all made for your fellow workers, facing off against the entirety of the media, the government, the police. It's and in this, one of the saddest things is how much it resonates with so many of the other labor struggles that we've learned about in our country and in countries across the globe. I think there's a lot of lessons we can take from that, but I just want to say thank you for sharing your deeply personal testimony,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that pig cop didn't get you worse than he did.
Well, we still fight for justice. I tried via a freedom of information request to get the details of my arrest and conviction, so I could get it overturned. I say I was framed in court. I ended up with 2 criminal records, threatening behaviour, and they resurrected a law that originates from the 1600s called watching and besetting, which actually means just looking at people. Wow. So I'm remarkable that I can threaten a policeman and look at him with the back of my head. Now, I know in our movement we need eyes in the back of our head at times, but that's damn ridiculous.
Oh.
But I, on my behalf, the NUM took out private prosecutions against 2 chief constables and the constable that had attacked me. Which is why I had to be framed to defeat that. I recently sent this freedom of information request to Derbyshire Police, wanting records, and guess what came back? There's no record of my arrest. No record.
Of course
They even
not.
sent me my £10 back that you have to pay for that. Couldn't find it. We sued 3 people, private prosecutions. I've got 2 criminal records that show up on all my criminal records checks. And here's the thing, I cannot even, if I wanted to, come and visit and show solidarity to those brave comrades in Alabama, because a few years ago I wanted to visit my partner's relatives and friends in the US, and I was denied a visa for those 2 criminal
Wow.
records, of which we cannot find. There is no evidence of, but mysteriously they crop up. So I'm labelled a violent thug at the age of 70. I still carry 2 criminal records that impact on me today. And I'm not the only one. There's thousands of us like that. And
Wow.
people who have been lucky enough, one of my comrades who was arrested at Orgreave actually got his, they've kept the papers from that, he actually got his arrest record, and it's so redacted, there's only his name visible.
Of course.
So,
Wow.
yeah, and those 95 that were arrested had to wait over a year to get to trial.
Mm.
Imagine that. You're waiting a year to know whether you're going to be sent down for life. And the trial eventually collapsed after 40 days when it was found that the police had fabricated evidence. That they all wrote identical statements. So we've had policemen come forward and say they were sat down in offices by mysterious people in suits who were special branch, who told them what they got to write. I say in my case, we can't even find any details. So that's what we're up against. Some of the files relating to the strike have been locked away, embargoed until 2066.
Wow.
Now I'll be 114 then, so I've started a healthy eating regime because I want to find out what happened to me.
Right, outlast those bastards.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I spend a lot of my time campaigning, speaking at the sort of meetings you talk about. If I can give a plug, if you put Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign, you'll come up with a website, our Twitter account, and our Facebook account. We're a very, very, to say there's only a handful of us, we're a very, very successful campaign. And we're keeping that flame alive, talking to today's trade unionists about our message and explaining how this country's in the mess that it's in because our strike was defeated. And can I say while I'm on, solidarity to my brothers and sisters in Alabama. I wish I could be there with you. That's why I got in touch with yourselves. I didn't just want to send a message to the National Union. I wanted it to get to the people on the front line. And so thank you for what you did.
When you sent that, we did send screenshots to folks that we know that are in the union, and so we were able to tell them, and we certainly appreciated that. Before you go, though, I am interested in I mentioned this earlier, and I did want to circle back to it before we let you go. Coming up to the present day, they're not striking right now, but there's a dispute that's culminated in several strikes, and potentially they'll strike again, the RMT, which is the rail union in the UK. And watching the media coverage over there, to the extent that I can and that I have, it almost makes me thankful for the media that we've got over here, because it's crazy. It's really, really wild. And, I think probably the problem here is mostly that the media will just ignore working people. But over there, it just seems like there's an onslaught of coverage against the RMT. So I'm wondering what it is like watching this as a former miner, as somebody involved in those strikes, if it's giving you deja vu.
Oh, not just deja vu, but inspiration. And what's happened is, I don't know if you've seen Mick Lynch, the secretary of the RMT, has actually tore a strip and answered perfectly calmly all the media slares, so much so that he's hardly getting any coverage now. What they're trying to do is demonize again all strikers. We're now told, despite the fact we've got 13% inflation and nobody's had a pay rise for 12 years, we're now told that it's wages that are causing inflation. And we've got the RMT, we've got the train drivers, ASLEF, out on strike today. We've got strikes on buses. We've got a strike where even nurses are starting to ballot. And can I say, going back to my union, we had a fantastic history of solidarity. I can't remember how many days I've been on strike in support of other unions, in particularly nurses, because they were the people who bandaged us up and mended us when we'd had an injury. So solidarity to everybody worldwide that's fighting back. In Britain, they're calling it the summer of discontent, and long may it continue. This is a chance to fight back.
Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. John Dunn, you've got the Orgreave Truth and Justice campaign. We've dropped that in the chat. We'll put it in our in the notes for the podcast. I really appreciate you coming on, brother. This has been
it's great. It's been a privilege, and thank you. It's people like you that make sure messages like ours make sure that the Alabama strikers, that their message gets out, because the national media we'll never do it. So solidarity, all power to your elbow, and hope you grow and grow. I'll do everything. There's some of my colleagues in the UK watching this, so we'll spread the word.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, brother. I
It's
appreciate it.
truly an honor. We appreciate
Solidarity.
it. You too, brother.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.